This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 143.
Welcome to We the SEs podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba.
What's up, SE Nation? Welcome back to another video. This is the first intro I'm recording in the new year. It's technically the second podcast interview you're listening to. I hope you had a great time during the holiday break, and hopefully 2021 will be a lot better than 2020. That should be easy to actually achieve. But hopefully you have some goals you want to achieve in 2021 and it works out for you. One of my goals is actually to get more ratings and reviews on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play, wherever. So I'm going to do two things. I want to support you while supporting me, and I also want to support one of the authors that has been on the show by the name of Tony Matos. So he has a book called Essential Guide to Sales Engineering, Essential Guide to Navigate Your Proof of Concept, Understand and Implement Practices to Increase Your Proof of Concept Win Rates. So I'm going to give out 3 copies to 3 people who actually leave a rating and review on whatever platform you guys use for this show, not any show. For this show, take a snapshot of that and please post it to your LinkedIn and tag me so I can actually see that you've done that. Your name goes into a hat and we'll pick a winner, let's say in a couple weeks, to see who got it. I would love for the review to be positive, but I would actually prefer it if it's a fair review. So if you have any constructive criticism for me about the way I conduct myself, the way Benny conducts himself on the podcast, please let us know. I take it to heart. I care about what you guys think because I want to make this better for you. Like I'm getting a lot out of it, but I also want it to be useful to you too. All right. So for today's show, we are talking to Steve Benson of Badger Maps. He's the CEO and founder of Badger Maps. And we talk a lot about how he's actually formulating his sales team as they're growing. That's the kind of the focus that we took on the show. We talked a little bit about leadership and a little bit about leading or difficulties leading during these interesting times. So we cover a wide variety of topics. We actually had a list of maybe like 10 questions we wanted to go through, but as it happens, we kind of went on tangents that seemed interesting at the time. So Steve will be back to the show at some point in the future. And again, if you enjoy the show, leave a rating and review for a chance to win one of 3 books from Tony Matos. And I will see you in the outro. Good afternoon, Steve. How are you?
Fantastic. How are you guys?
We're good. We're happy to have you on. For those of us, or for those listening who don't know who you are and can't see you, do you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. So I'm Steve Benson. I'm the CEO and founder of Badger Maps, which is a routing and scheduling application for field salespeople. And I lead a remote team. And so I'm here to talk about remote teams and really anything that people want to talk about.
Sure. Yeah. So you're the CEO. You've been able to kind of build your team the way you want it, build it in your image, so to speak.
Yeah.
How was the process of building a sales team along with the technical people behind it?
Well, I mean, when we were a 4-person company, that we had me selling, and one of the engineers would join if we had like a technical call that we needed to do. And unfortunately, I was lucky that one of my early engineers was also really good at communicating with customers and understood sales, and so he was able to move seamlessly from kind of the engineering role into the SE role and wear both hats. Then as we grew and developed, it was probably like maybe 3 years into the company, we hired our first CSA, and that person was technical enough, and the deployment of our product is simple enough that because at that point we weren't even like integrating with CRMs. We were just, it was, a web application. And so you kind of open up the browser and turn it on, right? So it was more of a setup than an SE role. But that person, that first CSA, who now actually leads the CSA team, she was technical enough that she could handle both the SE role and the CSA role. And if something was extremely technical in nature, then we could still pull in that engineer who was so good at communicating. As time went on, we've structured things in a pretty unique way, in that I've combined the CSA role and the SE role. So the customer success, the person that's supposed to be speaking with customers and managing the relationship on an ongoing basis, letting them know about new features, working with them on their setups, making sure they're getting everything and being successful with the product. That person is also the SE who will come in so that we'll bring that CSA into the relationship as an SE during the sales process. So they would, if the customer or the prospect wanted to do a trial, that CSA would set up the trial. They would answer technical questions. They would play the traditional SE role. But then upon purchase, the baton, there's no baton pass to a CSA the way there normally would be, because the CSA is the same person. So it's really just the salesperson managing the relationship until the sale, and then the SE supporting from a technical perspective, the trial, and then post sale, the salesperson just steps back from the relationship, and that same SE/CSA keeps managing the relationship going forward. And this isn't how most people do it. Most people have an SE and a CSA team. The reason this has worked so well for us is because our product's not that complex. So in that, like, to deploy it, it's not that complex for our customers. And so we've been able to kind of cross train the CSAs. And I guess you have to keep in mind with that you're doing it this way when you're hiring too, because you have to hire people who are, more technical than your average CSA. But by combining those two roles, we I think it's better for the customer. They like it a lot. And really, it's just a little extra training. You're kind of just, upon onboarding a new employee, you're training them not only on the CSA side, but the SE side. And which is made easier by, when we onboard people, we have them run kind of the smaller, easier deals first, and then they kind of step up in complexity and size over time.
Very
Okay.
cool. Oh, sorry. Go ahead there, Anson.
So just to clarify for the folks listening, when you say CSA, what does that stand for and what does that mean?
CSA, so CSA, CSR, so customer success associate or customer success rep, but a customer success person, the person who is in charge of the relationship with the customer, not as opposed to the salesperson who's in charge of the relationship with a prospect. So someone who has not signed a deal with you yet, is not a customer yet. Once they become a customer, they get managed by a customer success rep. And some people historically have had all three of these roles combined. Like when I started in software, I was the salesperson. So I would, source. Well, I guess I was the SDR. I would source the deal. I was the salesperson. I would manage the sales cycle. I was the SE because I had to do the technical stuff on that deal. And then I was a CSA. I was in charge of the relationship going forward and getting the renewal money, managing the relationship, et cetera, managing upsells. And we've broken that role in 4 ways. So now there's an SDR, sales development rep, who's in charge of generating the leads. Sometimes there's actually 2 types of SDRs. One's going outbound and one's dealing with the leads going inbound. Then there's the AE or sales account executive or sales rep, whose primary role is to take that lead from the SDR and then manage the sales cycle through to closure. And then there's an SE that would help from a technical perspective close that deal. And then upon closure, the baton gets passed to the customer success rep or the CSA, and that person will manage the relationship going forward. The person that really outlined this way of breaking up sales teams, it was done at Salesforce 20 years ago under Aaron Ross, who's a really sharp guy. I had him on my podcast, and his book Predictable Revenue was the book that kind of broke out how how to break, why it's so beneficial to break the traditional customer facing roles up in this way.
Okay, so you just took away like 3 of my questions. So
I'm glad I'm thorough.
So basically, we need to read that book to understand why you decided. Can you give us a brief, like in your mind? I know a lot of companies break up the roles, not necessarily into 4 different places. Like, so, like in networking, account managers do pre-sales, manage the relationship after the purchase and before the purchase. Why did you decide to do like CSRs and AEs?
So I believe that that's one of the most beneficial places to break up the role. Like if I could pick 2 out of SDR, AE, SE, and CSA, if I were going to collapse, and that's the traditional role combines all those. Like when I started, it was just called account executive or account rep, I forget, but it was all those roles combined. If I was only going to break it up 2 ways, I would break it up the way you just described into AEs, who would both source deals, so act like an SDR and do the AE role, and then CSAs, who I would have be SEs and CSAs. But the key reason I think that's so important, and that's the best way to snap it in half, is because pre-sales work is very different than post-sales work, and you can only do you could spend an infinite amount on either, but you can always try to sell more, try to source more leads, or try to work more deals, and you can always spend more time doing nice things for your customers, right? But if you don't break up the account management role, like the CSA role, the person that's managing existing customers, and the person that's finding new deals, you're not going to that person's going to generally float towards optimizing for one or the other. So they're not going to work their territory well enough for new deals. They're going to deal with their existing customers too much, or they're not going to help their existing customers enough, and they're going to focus on new deals. And because they're really such different jobs, you get a lot of economies of scale from breaking the 2 things apart. So meaning you get more done if you're focused. And so focusing someone on everything up till the point of them becoming a customer versus everything after the point of them becoming a customer, you're more efficient if you focus on one or the other. And frankly, the same person could do either role, but like same person, same skill set, could do either role. However, like if you had 2 identical guys that could do everything, by snapping them in half and having one do one and one do the other, you'll get more done across the board just from the focus.
That's I mean, that definitely makes sense too, right? Especially the whole idea of like another economic term, I suppose, almost like a comparative advantage of sorts, where you have your specific people focusing on their specific areas, that they're going to do better in those specific areas. Some of these stuff was pretty interesting, just in how you set things up with the SEs and CSAs being pretty aligned, or really being the same person in your organization, and then AEs and BDRs, or people sourcing deals, being the same person as well. I guess from a sales engineering perspective, where was your head at, I suppose, or did you ever have a sense of SEs being more pre-sale versus post-sale prior to, I guess, the setup that you have right now, where post-sales and SEs are the same person? Like, because you could, some people may argue that, or maybe the norm that a lot of organizations kind of experience, are the fact that SEs are typically on the sales side, helping source or helping sell those new deals and then throw it over the fence, which could cause other problems out, I guess, in and of itself. But where was your head at before you made the decision to be where you are right now?
Yeah, I mean, so I think you can do that. You can have SEs, you can have less technical CSAs if you have SEs that straddle both sides, right? So, and I don't think there's one answer that's right. It kind of depends on your company and the way you've structured, how complex your product is, how much help and handholding existing customers need technically. If your customers need a ton of highly technical ongoing help, and it's not just like relationship help, but it's like it's more technical and in nature, and like it's not just, oh, could you swap out the billing like this, or hey, could you add some more users like that, like, but it's really kind of more heavyweight engineering work. Then I think that you should break up the team in a different way. I would go SEs to help close the deal, and then I would have what do I call what do people call these? I don't have them myself, but there's a name for it. It's almost like an internal consulting firm, like
An implementation team or implementation manager.
No, that's kind of another name for SE, I think, but focused on just the implementation, like post sale. But no, I'm thinking of, so I guess it's not another name for SE, but yeah, that's another specific group. So, and a big company might have all of these different things. I mean, Badger Maps is only a 70-person company, so that's why we've collapsed things down. And I think if you're a 1,000-person company, then you have all these things, and you can choose whether or not you can have your implementation team be a paid consulting engagement organization or not. In general, if you can get it, you should ask for it. Like, that's a good thing to negotiate, and you can comp the sales reps at a lower rate because it's lower margin, but you can still comp them on packing that into a deal, and so you can charge for the implementation. The other thing is I want to call it like a TSR. I forget what that stands for, though. But the person that kind of is highly technical and manages the account going forward, but you have to pay for it. So it's like, oh, for 25 grand a year, you have access to this. Technical account rep, TAM, that technical account manager, TAM is what what I've seen them called before. So the person that in a TAM is a resource that for your existing customers. They don't help sell. So it's a specific type of SE, and you bring them in post sale and to manage the technical relationship going forward, especially if you have a highly technical product, and you generally want to make your customers pay like 25 grand a year or something to have access, whatever, kind of depending on how big your customers are and what your market yields, but you want them to pay on an ongoing basis to have access to this resource. And I guess how much you charge them is going to be determined a lot by how many accounts can one guy or girl run, right? So if it's like, oh, this one TAM, they're going to spend like 5 hours a week per customer, so they can kind of run 8 customers, and so you want to charge accordingly compared to, oh, you're going to spend 1 hour a month, so you can have a ton of customers, right? You can have like 100 customers. It's fine. You'd charge less then. But the key is a TAM is a charged asset, ongoing. It's an annual payment, and then the customer gets access to this resource that reduces risk and increases the chances of success, and is a now they have someone they can call if something's wrong, if they need something, etc. A lot of customers are willing to pay for that.
I've heard of the term resident engineer as well, where people pay for that resource. They're on site or off site, depends on how much they want to pay, and they get to do all the things that the customer doesn't want to do themselves.
Yeah, and sometimes that's a permanent resource. When I was at IBM, we had resources like that. That was like, this is an IBM employee, but they literally are on site at this customer all year long, and IBM took a margin for that.
And is the CSR doing any selling in your company, or is he just managing, or she managing the customer and renewing?
Renewals, upsells, depending on the complexity, they can pull the salesperson back into the relationship at that point. But yeah, they are kind of involved in the sales process when they're in that SE role, right? Because they have to understand the principles of sales, and where is this sale in its life cycle? What is a customer at this stage in the life cycle of this deal? What are their questions? What is the value they're looking to see? They need that CSA, or what I call CSAs, but I think on this show we should call CSA/SE, because they're doing both roles. They do need to understand the principles of sales, but they're not in charge of the blocking and tackling of the sales process. They're not in charge of negotiation, the legals, the setting. communicating with the organization, getting meetings scheduled with the right people, making sure the budget's in place, that sort of thing. That all is the responsibility of the salesperson.
Okay. You could call him a CSE, customer sales engineer, and just,
Yeah,
there you go.
absolutely. I mean, that's actually a good idea.
Yeah, there you go.
I just call them CSAs that also do this SE work, but yeah, CSE would work too. Although you put the word engineer in someone's title, and all of a sudden you have to pay them more. I've noticed that.
Oh, you can call CSC customer consultant. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and I think every organization probably wants to design this a little differently based on who their customers are, how big their customers are, how much their product costs, what their average customer annual payments are, and the complexity of their product from a technical perspective. I mean, some things you can't set up without engineers involved.
Yep. Well, the products that I sell cannot be set up without engineers. It's kind of difficult. In terms of training and coaching, is there a difference in the training of salespeople and the CSEs? I'm going to call them CSCs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's totally different. Two totally different things. I mean, our salespeople couldn't set up the product. Our CSAs, I mean, some of the CSAs could. The CSAs are more likely to be able to do the role of a salesperson well than the reverse, I think. But that might be because a lot of the people who are on the CSA team started in sales, and then kind of as they move down the path of their career, they could have gone the CSA direction or stayed the sales direction or gone the management direction, and they chose the CSA direction. And so they already have the skills of a salesperson. So you but I mean, if we're hiring someone from day one to be a CSA versus a salesperson, we have different training modules. There is a lot of overlap though. I mean, both sides need to understand the sales cycle, but like one side really needs to it really is in charge of executing and managing that sales cycle, the salesperson. And so they need to be better versed in that. Also, they run into communicating about different things, right? Like they need to handle different objections. And so you kind of focus the training more on the technical side versus more on the value side, which is a little different.
Fair. Oh, so just super quickly, if you don't mind, do you think that, or have you found that the same person could train both roles, or do you tend to try to find two different trainers for each specific side of things?
It's two different trainers. It's I mean, we're small enough that we don't have anyone who's in the official training role, like their title has the word training in it, but we have leaders, both official and unofficial, meaning they either, I guess a leader could manage people or could not manage people, right? So we have managers and then what I would call leaders on these teams, people who help with the training and are more in charge of, and that's kind of a part of the responsibility of their job. But that if a CSA, a customer success person, is going to be trained by someone like that, whereas a salesperson is going to be trained by that person, but on the other side.
In terms of hiring salespeople, do you prefer to hire newer, less experienced salespeople and train them yourself, or hire existing experienced salespeople?
I've done both. And there are pluses and minuses to both. I mean, it's, there's more risk in bringing in an outside person who has 15 years of experience and putting them in like a senior role in your organization, because you don't know that they're going to be great at selling your thing, and they may have a lot of skills and ideas that are built up around selling something that's different, different buyer, different price point, et cetera. So it can be kind of tricky to teach someone new tricks, right? But whereas with someone new, you can kind of really shape and train them to do exactly what you want them to do in the way that you want them to do it. So I think a quick answer is both would work.
All right, let's focus on the newer ones, because I got the feeling that you prefer that. What are the challenges you face or they face in learning how to do sales or the challenges you face in coaching them and training them?
Well, I mean, right now I think we're facing different challenges than usual. I think, you know, with someone who's like right out of school, for example, or has someone with very little experience, there's just more to train them on. They're greener. They know less about the world. So you're taking them from you get to take them in the direction your organization wants to take them, which is nice from a skill set perspective and like a outlook of way of looking at the world perspective. Um, but you do have more, you know, someone who's been in sales for 40, someone who's 40 years old or something, like and been in sales the whole time. They naturally already have picked up a ton of skills. Like they get how to overcome an objection. And, you know, is an objection at this company that different than their last company? I mean, probably not. They already know how to negotiate. I mean, in these times, you know, I think these are really challenging times to train people, you know, often remotely, to coach people often remotely. I think both are really challenging. I do think that sales managers or customer success managers should be spending about 50% of their time coaching their team. I think very few people actually are doing that. And when I say coaching, I mean, like on the sales side, it could be pre-call strategizing or post-call debriefing or doing joint calls with the rep, or, you know, coaching around a specific opportunity. Anything really would that makes the rep better and kind of moves them downfield and their skill set downfield would count towards that 50% rule of thumb. But like I said, I think very few people are actually doing that. In terms of what needs to be coached right now, that's, you know, in this remote world that we're in, to really both sides, negotiation, I think specifically how to defend your margins. And I think CSAs and NAEs both need training there, because it comes up with existing customers and prospective customers. But I think negotiation is a great thing that everyone should freshen up on right now. I think pipeline building for the sales reps is a really important thing to be focused on. You know, you often need to rethink how you're prospecting, with what messaging, and to whom you're prospecting to. And because the economy has changed, perhaps the best buyer for your product or service has shifted a little bit, or even sometimes a lot, right? I mean, I've seen some of our customers have, you know, really had to make a shift, like a company that uses our product that sells to gyms. Historically they've sold a product that is used in gyms, and they've had to shift to like apartment buildings gyms, away from kind of like that was kind of a small part of their business, but in like more established gyms is the bigger part of their business, and they've had to really make a big shift. um so but yeah, I think bottom line, I think those are the things that you really got to focus on: negotiation and prospecting. You know, getting your weapons sharp and get ready to go out and hunt.
So how has negotiation changed before and after going remote?
Well, I think the biggest difference is that people, prospective customers and existing customers, are tightening their belts, right? And so I think this is kind of, um, that, so they're just negotiating for more, they're asking for more. I think that a lot of times the negotiation landscape is shifting because of competitive pressures. So your company could be doing just fine, but your competitor's company could be in trouble. And, you know, a desperate competitor is going to do desperate things: deep discounting, liquidation of inventory, giving away free consulting or other valuable things, because they're just trying to make ends meet, right? So I think the landscape is shifting, but also, um, there's pressures from your customers and from your prospects that just really wasn't there before, right? On the negotiation side, they're just, a lot of times they've been instructed that there's a spending freeze, and it comes from the very top, the CFO or the CFO is like, hey, we're out of money, don't spend any money, don't buy anything. But things will still be purchased in the cases that you are able to show, hey, this is the value that you're going to get out of this thing. It's going to pay for itself in the next 2 months. Like we should, this is the benefit in terms of dollars that you're going to get from this. If someone in an organization is looking at something like that, they can go to the CEO or the CFO and say, hey, I know there's a spending freeze, but this is something we should buy because it's going to pay back. I think procurement departments are, and the way they're behaving is another shift in the negotiation landscape. And, they're able to leverage the down economy to be more aggressive, right? They're looking to jam down your margins and scrape more nickels off the table for themselves. And remember, like, procurement professionals they are professional negotiators when you think about it, right? Like,
Yep.
they are good at, squeezing you like a wet rag. And when will they stop squeezing? They'll stop squeezing when the wet rag stops giving water, right? So you do have to, if they're more aggressive, you have to be more aggressive too. You have to stop giving concessions at some point and recognize when you're in a zero sum portion of a negotiation instead of a win-win part of a negotiation. And you got to pull the e-brake.
The big thing I find also, if they're successful in negotiating us down further than usual, they're going to expect that. They're going to know that they're able to do that, and they're going to expect to do that even when things go back to normal.
Absolutely.
So it's something to keep in mind. I know, like, this show is mostly for SEs, but if anyone's interested in becoming a salesperson, negotiation is one of the top things that you need to learn. And I always tell even SEs, every time you open your mouth, it's a negotiation, because you either add value to the deal or you reduce the value of the deal. So even SEs should learn about negotiation.
Yeah, absolutely. And the best reps, the best customer facing reps could play any of these roles. Like, the best salespeople could be an SE. The best SE could be a salesperson. The best customer success rep could be a salesperson. Like, they're trained up and spun up on all the skill sets across the board, and they could play, it's like the best soccer player would be great on defense, or, as a striker, or, in the midfield. Like, you could ask a great soccer player to play any position, and the best soccer players would be great at all of it.
Like, I would agree partially. I think it depends on the complexity of the product, but yeah, in general terms, it's the skills should overlap a lot.
It's never going to hurt you to be good at the other stuff, right? And in particular, if you're an SE, you probably, it's way easier, I think, to move from SE to sales, than it is to move from sales to SE, because a lot of times you have to have there's a lot of prerequisite knowledge to being, to being an engineer and having that kind of technical background. Whereas I think sales skills are much more human skills that anyone can learn. It's practice, and that's harder to get, probably.
Fair. And also, I mean, it's kind of maybe calling back to when you were talking about training. Obviously, these are all things that come with training, but you talked about how nowadays, with COVID, remote training is a little bit different, or just maybe remote training in general, maybe also during COVID, that also adds an element to making it a little bit more challenging to go through. And I mean, there's probably a whole slew of reasons as to why that is. Obviously, people are burnt out from staying at home all the time, and just due to COVID, and you don't get the facial feedback, I suppose, or just real-time feedback from facial features and whatnot while training as well. Maybe there are other big reasons as well. And if there are, feel free to mention them. But what would you suggest to people that are having challenges or experiencing these challenges when it comes to remote training? How would you suggest they get around them? What are some ideas?
Well, I think that it's just harder to learn if you're not in the room with someone. So it just takes more time. And so I think you do have to adjust your expectations to some degree. I mean, certain things, the best way to learn them is to read about them in a book. Other things, the best way to learn about them is to be in a room with someone who's doing it already and see them doing it. And it just kind of depends on the thing. And so recognizing which are which as you're teaching things, and slowing down for the parts that really, and focusing on the parts that really, it's like, yeah, this is more experiential. Like, the way you learn this is by seeing someone do it. That, like, focusing on those, because those are the areas that you're going to fail. Where, like, the quadratic equation, you can learn that from the pages of a book and practicing the practice problems, right? Like, you don't need to be in the same room as someone who's great at the quadratic equation. But I think a lot of the softer skills and things on the sales side, you learn it, the best way to learn them is by seeing them done. It's through that apprenticeship.
Fair, that makes sense. I was about to ask a question around like, would you differentiate, or is there a general rule as to what's better learned through experiential learning versus what's in a book? But I think you just said it, the hard versus soft skills. That makes perfect sense. Sorry, a lull there. I did have a question in mind, but I don't have it anymore.
Can I ask my question?
Of course, yeah. Sorry.
So how have you changed your behavior in terms of leadership, and how have you guided your leaders within your company to change their relationship with now that everything's remote?
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, I think an economic crisis of this nature is probably the hardest time to be a sales leader because the whole company depends on the revenue that your team is producing to survive, right? So sales leaders need to be truly great in a time of crisis like this. So I guess what have I tried to change, and what do they have to change in general? I mean, now more than ever, I think leaders in all capacities need to be, they need to confront reality. They need to be action oriented. They need to be honest in their assessments of like the challenges that are facing the organization. They need to embrace the bad news, recognize the bad when there's bad news, embrace it, and ask hard questions, but at the same time be positive and build an action plan that is and be transparent with their team. I think transparency is really important in these times. Be transparent with their team about what that plan is. I'm trying to be very responsive and more supportive of my team. I think people are scared. It's a crazy time right now. I think people are worried about losing their jobs. They're worried about their commission checks evaporating. They're worried about how hard it'll be to get another job. Sales reps don't pay their mortgage with their base, right? So people are concerned about performance and what's around the next corner here. Is the stock market going to crash? Is the economy is the bottom going to fall out of it? I think so that's a key piece to being a leader right now. I talked about coaching and being, spending 50% of your time coaching your teams and working with them to make them better. I think that's important. Don't go silent. I think that's, it's easy to slip into just being silent in this remote world that we're in. And I think you got to stay in front of everybody. You got to ask your reps questions and find out what they need to be successful. I think you need to figure out on who on the team, whatever type of team it is having success right now. If it's a sales team, who are you being successful selling to, right? What is the customer profile? What do they look like? How big are they? Figure out where the wins are coming in, and what is the playbook for that success. And then with the help, enlist the help of the sales rep that like cracked the code on how to be successful right now. Enlist their help to teach the rest of the team, all the other reps, how they can replicate that success. I think you, as a leader right now in this time, it's important to know what's going on at the ground level in any team, right? Because if you don't understand what's going on at the ground level, it becomes really difficult to steer the ship. In times of uncertainty, knowing what's happening at the closest level to the customer, or the closest level to like who's dealing with this issue with our product right now. You have to know what's going on there, because and in any time you do, it's just your decisions are more important now than ever, right? Because things are just tighter.
True. Now, somebody mentioned that, I mean, agreed. And I think like the collaborative approach that you described when it comes to kind of building up one's team and kind of getting those first understanding what's going on the ground, and then having those that are excelling at it, kind of spreading their success across the team. That's a really good idea. Do you think that there's some people out there? I'm sure there must be, I'd imagine, some people out there that have an idea or concept that, we're in times of crisis right now. I need to steer the ship in the right direction. I'm a leader, or so I think I am. And so I'm going to steer it in a certain direction. I'm going to take control over all this and just kind of lead it where I think it's going to need to go. Are there dangers to that? Is kind of like taking control over things and just maybe being super assertive to make a certain, I guess, to push a team in a certain direction, a good thing, a bad thing in times of crisis? What's your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, when there are external forces being forced upon you, there are risks to dealing with those forces, right? You can make mistakes, you can do it wrong, you can choose the wrong path. Um, you know, like the company that I run, we've been growing at 40% a year for years, right? Like we've been killing it. And this year, we'll be lucky if we only shrink 10%. This is in terms of revenue, right? And just because we had such a big crash in the beginning, I mean, I think probably 25-30% of our customers went out of business, right? And or made changes that got shut down the field sales team for now. Maybe they'll bring it back, and I think they will bring it back later. But like a lot of companies either changed the way they were going to market and shifted more towards like an online situation, away from retail, away from field sales, and started going to market with the internet. Now, I think in a lot of those cases, there's a reason they weren't doing that before, or there was a reason that was a smaller part of their business before, and it was because it wasn't the best way for them to go to market. And I think they'll make a switch back. But I guess to your question, yeah, there's risks to as a leader choosing a path. There's a risk that you're choosing the wrong path, right? And so I think it's just a harder time to be a leader now because because it's a tough time. When times are easy, it's a lot easier, right? Like the decisions are often more obvious. Making a decision to like pivot who you're going after or something because your current, like that customer that I was talking about, like who they were selling to like nice gyms and stuff, shifting that to, and like in hotels and private gyms, et cetera, shifting that to we're trying to sell to apartment buildings. That's a big pivot, right? Like that, changing who your customers are because your existing customers are totally screwed right now. That is a ballsy pivot. That's an important pivot. It may not work. There's risk to it. You could be wrong. Like I think it's easier to test things out in smaller incremental ways in good times, whereas sometimes I think people are really hammering the rudder all the way to the left or the right, trying to really steer a big ship hard and in time because they have to in a time of crisis like this.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
There's a lot of information in there. Like sometimes there's a fear of making a decision and you end up running into a wall or steering too far left or too far right, and now you can't course correct later. So it is hard in this time to actually make decisions. You're right. So how do you mitigate the decision-making process?
I mean, yeah, mitigating the risks in the decision-making process. I mean, I think you have to be careful changing your strategies too much. I've seen people get it wrong as often as I've seen them get it right. Like just blindly increasing sales activity, but you lose the focus and you lose the quality of the people you're going after, and so you end up having more interactions but closing less business, right?
Yeah.
You can make bad decisions if you're panicking or if you're afraid, and it's understandable, right? These are human decisions. But I would say principles like quantity rarely makes up for quantity. I'm sorry, quantity never makes up for quality. I think things like that still ring true. So focusing on like the best leads and the qualified leads, and not lowering your qualification standards that you already know are proven out. I think that principles like that are important because you have to, and when you do make a change, if you do make a shift, make sure that you do what you would do in good times too, right? You'd test it out. You wouldn't just suddenly swing in a direction. You'd test it and make sure it's going to work for you. You'd make sure that you're going to try to gather as much data to make a good decision as possible. So that's that I think that's the way you mitigate that risk.
Yeah, definitely that whole data gathering piece, without a doubt. I think that's probably one of the most important things that you probably need to do, is just have a good sense as to just to understand everything that's going on around you and all the different factors that are affecting the environment that you're in to be able to make an informed decision.
All right, we're almost at the top of the half hour. Generally speaking, we usually go through the not so fire round, but we are running out of time, and it seems that I'm being pulled into an emergency meeting last second. So we will have to end it here. I want to know a little bit more about your podcast and where people can find it. And if people want to reach out to you, where can they do that?
Yeah, for sure. My podcast is called Outside Sales Talk. It's a podcast kind of specifically geared for outside salespeople. I guess outside sales SEs or customer success reps as well. Kind of anything where you're meeting customers face to face, and I bring on experts in different elements of sales or who have written key books and have them kind of discuss the topic that they're an expert in through the lens of this is for people that are working face to face with their customers. And then, if you want to get in touch with me, LinkedIn's probably the best place to do that. Just search Steve Benson, Badger Maps. Might be Steven Benson, Badger Maps. I forget, but it'll all work, I bet.
We'll have a link in the show notes.
Perfect. And if you're in field sales, check out Badger Maps. It's a great product and does some cool things. It saves people a lot of time.
All right. Well, thanks, Steve, for coming on. I appreciate it, and hopefully we'll talk soon.
Outstanding. It's been great to be here. I appreciate having me on.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Thanks, Steve, for coming on. It was a joy talking to you. It's interesting to see how people actually build their sales teams and their SE teams, if they have any, from the ground up, and the way they combine different roles, especially for startups where people are doing all sorts of different roles within the company. Like a sales engineer could also be IT at the same time. So it's just interesting to see it, and it's interesting to talk to someone who's actually doing it. So check out Badger Maps, badgermapping.com. They haven't sponsored the show. It's just if you want to take a look and see what they do, take a look at Steve's podcast. He didn't mention he talks more like to not high tech sales, more like people who sell wine or stuff like that. So check it out. See if it's interesting for you. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. And I will see you next time. With that, this is Ramsey for Benny, who was on the show but not on the outro, signing off.